Okay, let's try this again. I have been perfecting this. I don't think it's going to be perfect, but I want it to be not as long as what it was, and I wanted it to flow a little bit closer. And so I'm going to read Genesis 40, verses 9 through 13 and 16 through 19, and talk about the butler and the baker. Which one are you? What purpose do you have? Are you like a grape, or are you like bread? So it says, and the chief butler told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream, behold, a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches, and it was as though it budded, and her blossom shot forth, and the clusters thereof brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said unto him, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head and restore thee unto thy place, and thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand after the former manner when thou wast his butler. So that's a favorable report. Verse 16, when the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said to Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head, and the uppermost basket there was all manner of baked meats for Pharaoh. The birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. And Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation thereof. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head off thee, and shall hang on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh from off of thee. Okay, so when you're looking at it, it talks about the butler first, okay? And the butler had quite a job. Everything was dependent upon what the grapes tasted like. There was nothing being added or mixed. It was completely correlating to the grapes and to his job with Pharaoh. Okay, so let's look at what grapes have and what they're all about. So they start with a vine. And it's quite a longer process, and it needs a lot of time and heat to make a good final product. And the soil will determine the overall product because of its potassium level. And it goes through 4 cycles. It goes through pollination, so something comes in and it aggravates it, and it has an interaction with another. And I consider this like our relationship with God. And the flowers aren't just there to look pretty. They have an essential component of the overall cycle. Okay, but that flower, that blossoming, is to show that something is going on and that something can happen. Pollination, grapes can self-pollinate. They don't need anything else in order to make things, to reproduce. They just need the sun. Okay, fertilization is where new life is created. Not every flower is fertilized into a berry, and those will simply just fall off the vine. The fruit stage is critical as it becomes the initial indicator of the potential crop yield or the harvest. Growth is necessary to get the final product. So this is what I call the ugly period. It's a lot of growth and development go together. Okay, becoming who you are, but you're not at your potential yet. You think you've reached your limit, but you haven't hit the heat yet. Okay, and the development is really where the mannerisms and the behaviors and how you see things will go through. And growth and development, they just take time. Think about a 5-year-old. They think they're such a big kid. And then at 10, they think, well, I know all sorts of things. At 15, they think they know everything. At 20, what more could I possibly learn? And at 25, why are you telling me I'm wet behind the ears? I'm 25. But now being older, you can see that there's so much left to learn. And there's always this push, this rush to go through the stages, but it cannot be sped up. It's called a reiterative process. You're going to go around this circle over and over and over and over again, and it's necessary. And every time you go through this process, you're looking at the world, the experiences through a new lens because you have new understanding from what you've gone through. So every time you're going to see things and experience things and try new things. And so growth and development, it's all about that process. But heat is necessary for growth and the development of the grape. You must have heat at times, like seasons. I don't like a lot of heat, but it's necessary in order to develop a really good grape. But like a season, it has a beginning and an end. It's not a quick process. It takes a long time. So seasons have highs and lows that both come. And for the grape, it's necessary for them to grow and develop. The heat is changing the grape every time. I'm sure it's an uncomfortable process that is painful at times, kind of like a sunburn, because the grape changes colors and it never goes back to its previous color when it interacts with that heat. The heat is not constant. It isn't always 400 degrees or 1200 degrees or 100 degrees. It changes and it fluctuates and it varies from day to day. And some heat waves happen, and this is when people start going, well, what's going to happen to the grape product and blah, 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 blah. But all of this is able to be handled, okay? And it can make the grape better. What happens when heat gets really difficult? After a hot day, you need that cool evening, and these would be like resting periods to preserve the grapes. Use it to preserve the grape and to not have them burn up. They need to cool off a little bit, and I think this is kind of like our rest days, or when we fellowship or go to church or read the word, we are getting a resting time. If you tried to just eliminate the heat altogether and just have like a temperate climate where it never gets too hot, never gets too cold, you're actually not going to have a very good grape. It's going to have dramatic effects on the grape overall. It won't reach the sweetness level that is desirable. Who would think that heat is beneficial, even though it's hot and it burns and it changes? It's so beneficial. Harvest time is the most exciting time because this is when it reaches optimal ripeness. The vines are lush with green foliage and the grapes are plush and purple, and everybody's excited because you can see it coming. And it's been such a big, long time, but everything is out in the element, everything is exposed, and there is no surprise when it's ready because nothing has been hid. And so the butler, what he did, once he got these grapes, remember that great growth and development that had happened. He took those grapes. He knew exactly what had happened to those grapes. He knew exactly where they came from. And he squeezed them directly into the Pharaoh's cup and handed it to the Pharaoh. Because his job was to take care of the master. His only job was to focus on his master. And so he was completely vulnerable, though. He was vulnerable, and if those grapes were terrible, the Pharaoh could say, man, I hate you. But he knew before he handed it to him what was already going to happen, because he was in such an intimate relationship. He knew exactly what was going on. And also, when you have that kind of relationship with your master, where your whole job is to serve and take care of the king or the master, you're going to have some favor. So now let's look at the bread. Notice how it doesn't talk about the production of the bread. It doesn't talk about the grinding of the wheat and mixing it with the leavening agents and mixing it with the sugar and all those things. Have you ever tasted flour? It tastes terrible. You can't eat it on its own. You even have to bake it because otherwise it can be bad. So flour and grapes, completely different. Grapes you can eat and they're beneficial. If you wait and you heat them up, they get even better and they can produce other things. But flour, it's not good on its own. And you have to add other things in order to make it happen. So what can be shown can be quite deceptive. Only with cutting to the inside are you able to see what's at the core. Okay, so the whole process is different. It's not like a season, it's a one-time event, and it's consistent. Okay, it has consistent time period, has consistent heat, and you have to modify your environment to make it ripe for beauty. Okay, so if your elevation, your humidity, your temperature, all of those things will impact how your bread turns out. And so anyone who's experienced can know how to work it so that it'll look good and still get something good out of it. But there's no exposure to the elements. There's no seasons. And so even if it gets burnt a little bit, you're not directly giving that to the king. You still need to make it look pretty before you present it. So you can do a little bit of deceptive trickery and scrape off those burnt edges or shave off the ends. So presentation is everything. His label was baker, But his job wasn't just to feed the king. It was to feed everybody, and the king only got a portion. So notice the difference in the job titles or the job descriptions. He could have, and what he presented could be completely different than what he said it was. He could have substituted to make it cheaper and to get more benefits. He could have used inferior products. He could have had someone else make it completely, only to pass it off as his own. He could have become impatient and not waited long enough to have it completely cooked. If it's not completely cooked, you're not going to be serving those uncooked portions. And if you're out of time, you'll just take the end products and make it look like it's the entire thing. You're going to try to present it like it's everything, but you and I both know that that's not what happened. And if you gave the middle, everybody would know that it's not complete and that you wouldn't have a good product and that you still needed more time. So you hide that part or you throw that part away. So it's a quick product, bread, but it doesn't go as far. So the baker, what he would do is they would put these baskets, and men would put them on their head and women would put them on their shoulders, and they would carry their supplies like that. And so the kitchen was on one side of the courtyard and the dining room was on the other, and there was this open area between them, and birds would know about this. So there would be lots of birds flying in and out, and the baker was taking his, and he had 3 baskets, 3 white baskets. So showing these white equaling purity, showing, look what I did. And he has them up in the top one. Okay, and the birds, they're these rapacious birds. That's what one of the commentaries said. And that means that they were greedy and subsisting on the capture of living prey that were ready to pounce down upon choice morsels and take all the good stuff. And they're only going to leave the crumbs behind. And if he knew this was coming, why didn't he protect himself? Why didn't he protect the bread? He was too full of himself and his product to let anything happen. And he probably was thinking too much about himself and didn't take time to really think about what he needed to do to protect the bread. And looking at the bread, it can smell and look perfect. Is it cooked enough though? Is it doughy in the middle? Well, how do you know that? You got to cut into it, right? And it says that in the New Testament, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. So God said that not all things that make it bigger are good. And God also says you can't live on bread alone. You cannot live on the favor of people and on appearances. It has to be something deeper than that, or you're really going to be mistaken. And sometimes people are going to bring out a polished product, but it isn't like what it says it is. When I take bread out of the oven, if I want to make it look really good, I'm going to put butter on it so it shines on the outside. And did you know, even after I make it shiny on the outside, if I cut into it, it's not going to look good. Sometimes, if I didn't cook it long enough, if it wasn't in the heat long enough, if it didn't change to the heat. The good thing is the heat, it can go back into the heat. But the problem is most people won't. They'll just take the good parts and throw away the bad, or they'll just start all over. But when you put it back in, you can have a good product. It just won't look pretty. But what's your purpose for your bread? Is it to look pretty, or is it to benefit? What do you guys think?